Hey everybody, today I'm going to be doing another book review, and this is the Corset Waist Training Primer written by Anne Grogan of Romantasy. I had already reviewed one of Anne Grogan's past books, Corset Magic. I think that was back in 2011, and she has released that book again. She's released a new edition, which I read through about a year or two ago. But this book is a different one. It's actually a little bit shorter, and it's meant to be more of an introduction as opposed to being like the whole Bible of everything that has to do with corsets and waist training and what happens to the body and how to dress and like all this other stuff. So it's meant to be a bit more short and digestible, but still it is extremely thorough, and it is a much more attractive price as well. So the book Corset Waist Training, which I'm just going to call the primer from now on for simplicity, it's not really meant to be a full replacement of Corset Magic, but it's definitely a way to get you started, hence a primer. I would estimate the primer itself to be around 100,000 words, whereas the Corset Magic book is around 125, maybe 130,000 words. And I think the Corset Magic book goes into more detail about what happens to the body when you wear a corset. That's mentioned more briefly in the primer, but in the Corset Magic book they go into a lot of research, and she speaks to many doctors. And I believe there are other chapters pertaining more to men wearing corsets and that sort of thing. Like I said in my old Corset Magic review, if you're not sure if wearing corsets or waist training is for you and you know nothing about it, it's better to invest a little bit in a book and educate yourself as opposed to spending $300 or $400 on a custom corset that you might never wear because you might find that wearing corsets just isn't for you. And now that you have the primer for $15 instead of the Corset Magic book for $50, it is a much smaller investment, and so it's less of a hurdle. So what the primer does, it takes the basics of Corset Magic, you know, what to look for in a corset, why a corset doesn't hurt, and a lot of tips and tricks on waist training and how to keep yourself motivated and all of that. In the old Corset Magic book, I remember saying in my review that there were quite a few typos. There was, spelling errors and grammar errors. I found it difficult to read in that I didn't find that it was the most organized it could be. And like I said before, a lot of the corset makers that were listed in the back of the book were no longer in business. So the primer also takes care of all of that. And the primer I also found is much better in spelling and grammar and punctuation and all of that, and I find it to be better organized than Corset Magic. One thing I should say from the start before I go into the finer details of this book is that oftentimes in this book, waist training is mentioned hand in hand with weight loss. And so there's a lot of emphasis in this book placed on losing weight and having a svelte figure. While that does seem to be the general trend with people who do want to waist train, I do know of many other people who have successfully trained their waist and develop a curvier natural silhouette while just staying the same weight or even gaining weight over time. So I know that waist training can be achieved independent of weight loss. And I know that people are happy with the size that they are. So if you're rocking your size, no matter what size that may be, and you have no intention of losing or changing your weight, there are sections of this book that will not apply to you. And I guess try not to be offended by many of the statements where waist training is mentioned hand in hand with weight loss. If you have a history of disordered eating, some parts of the book might be considered a little bit triggering for you, especially, the portion sizes and food restriction and things like that. So do keep that in mind. But Anne does acknowledge this in parts. She does write on page 24 of this book, when following the basic waist training steps outlined in this book, depending on your figure size and shape, it's not unusual to find that you permanently lose 2 to 3 inches or more from your waist with or without weight loss. But it also mentions here, you might lose from a few pounds up to 20 or more. Sorry about the lighting. It seems every day I want to record, there's like a mix of sun and cloud. So I like to film with natural light. I'm really sorry that it keeps getting lighter and darker. I hope you can forgive me on that. But let's move on to the actual details of this book, and I'll put a split screen so you can see select pages so you will know what to expect in this book. And I'm probably going to be looking down for the majority of the video because I'm actually looking on the screen at the book, and I will put like a screen capture share beside it. So this book comes in 4 parts. Part 1 is 52 pages long, about 20,000 words. Search function works on the PDF, so that's awesome. And it also includes page numbers, so it's easier to keep your place. The introduction of this book goes into the parallels between corset training and dieting or starting a fitness regime, and how it all really starts in your mind and with your priorities. You might think that something like this starts with, oh, how tight do you wear your corset? How long do you want to wear it? And in the case of diet and exercise, how much do you want to exercise, how intense, and what you eat and how much. But really, the parallels between it all is that it does start in your mind with your motivation, and you need to really figure out, like, why is this a priority to you? It might involve quite a bit of, mentally checking in. And Anne says that how we react in times of stress, challenging times, emergency is particularly telling. It's definitely more telling than how you are likely to act in, when things are good and easy and stress-free. Anne also mentions that waist training regimens are highly individual and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The same way that, one person can feel amazing on one certain diet while another person can do the same diet and feel terrible. And I fundamentally agree with this as a nutritionist as well. If one diet worked for everybody, we'd only ever have one. But obviously, different things work for different people. She also recommends checking in with a waist training coach, having a buddy system, even talking to a counselor if you really need to identify unhealthy automatic behaviors, journaling, things like that. The first chapter also deals with many of the benefits that you might experience wearing corsets. Not only the physical benefits like better posture, back support, appetite reduction, if that's your thing, but also the comforting aspects of deep pressure, the possible reduction of stress and anxiety. Chapter 2 is all about the corset question, which is, don't corsets hurt? And obviously the answer to that is no, as long as the corset you're wearing is of decent quality and it's properly fitted to the unique hills and valleys of your body, and you are wearing it responsibly. And wearing a corset responsibly also means that you listen to the signs and signals of your body and you are willing to loosen the laces of your corset or take the corset off completely when you feel the need to do so. Chapter 2 here goes into various unsavory experiences Anne has had with those, sensationalistic TV segments and news reports, which of course negatively portrayed corsets. And I definitely sympathize, as I have multiple responses to such segments on my blog. So if you'd like to read those responses to various, TV segments and whatnot, I'll put a link to those below. In chapter 3, Anne gives plenty of before and after examples showing many of her previous students who permanently lost inches on their waist, some of them losing a significant amount of weight as well. I think the most dramatic was one client who lost 50 pounds in 3 months. However, Anne is also quick to mention that this is not a lose weight quick scheme. It requires considerable discipline, consistency, often a lifestyle change. And she says waist training works best if you focus not only on wearing the corset, but changing other elements of your life as well, including what to eat, how to exercise, all that stuff. But even though this regimen requires considerable control, she recommends going into it with an open mind, a positive mindset, because you don't want to force it on yourself and develop a sense of resentment towards the corset or your routine. All right, so we're finally on to part 2, and this is 82 pages, and I believe it's like another 25,000 words or so. So chapter 4 goes into the requirements of a perfect waist training corset. I remember reading this in Corset Magic in around 2010, 2011, and being really surprised by the amount of scrutiny that went into every detail of the corset. And now in 2018, I'm just like, oh yeah, like pretty much all of these points are reasonable. Most of these requirements are, obviously non-stretch, tightly woven fabric, a strong thread, tidy stitches, steel bones, front busk, 2-part grommets, presence of a waist tape. It's things that are what I would consider kind of obvious to me by now. Anne says that for best results with waist training, get an underbust corset made custom to your measurements. And then she goes into a lot of detail on how to measure yourself accurately for a custom corset. Above all, Anne recommends that you don't rush into getting a corset. She is vehement against off-the-rack corsets, which is obviously where she and I disagree because I've reviewed so many off-the-rack corsets. But where she and I do agree is that if somebody is impatient about choosing a corset, they don't want to put any homework into exploring their options, or they place budget over their own comfort and proper fit, they just want something, as cheap as possible, then they are likely not going to be successful regarding their waist training over time, because that is a long, slow process which requires considerable discipline and control and patience. So if you are super impatient about even finding the right corset for yourself, how are you even going to be patient enough to do waist training properly and safely? She also troubleshoots many corset fitting issues, like if the top is too loose or too tight, the corset is too long or too short, and also gives special consideration for clients who have scoliosis and some other asymmetries. She also talks about how to lace up your corset, how to make sure that it's fitting properly, and that any fit issues it might be due to the way that you're wearing it, maybe too high or too low or upside down, as opposed to, the corset maker may be making a mistake with the measurements or something. She also talks about the breaking in or the seasoning process, and also beginning your waist training regimen, which takes us to chapter 5. So in chapter 5, she employs a 13-step system for successful waist training. She walks you through the preparation and knowing what to expect, taking your before pictures and your measurements and your stats. And then she shows you how to set realistic goals for yourself. Not only the number of inches off your waistline and how much you want to lose or how much weight you might want to lose if that applies to you, but also how long you want your intensive training period to be. Anne recommends a minimum of 3 months for your waist training regimen, wearing the corset 6 days out of the week and giving yourself 1 day of rest every week. She also walks you through the roller coaster method for waist training and ways to keep these goals, like writing a contract with yourself, hiring a coach, having a buddy system, betting money on it, or some other type of reward and punishment system, having a daily ritual, journaling, even visualization and meditation, and a lot more. And now we get to part 3. So chapter 6 deals exclusively with food and eating habits. And Anne recommends breaking up your daily food intake into 6 to 8 small meals and snacks spread all throughout the day. So basically like grazing. She also recommends cutting down on refined sugars and processed foods, which I also tend to agree with generally, and having more fiber and water in your diet, but not overdoing it on the water so that you're peeing like every 5 minutes. There are certain points of concern within this chapter. Like I said, for instance, calorie counting. Some people can easily run away with that and, take that to extremes. Some of the portion sizes mentioned in this book are smaller than I would recommend as a nutritionist, but I understand that Anne is mentioning this in the context that one may not be able to eat full-size portions while waist training. Anne eats quite often, around 7 to 8 times a day, while other people who waist train may eat 4 times a day or whatever works for them. So I recommend that you find what works best for your body. What I do agree with a lot in this chapter is mindful eating. Eating slower than you're used to, not just scarfing down a meal within 5 to 10 minutes if you can help it with your lifestyle. Also focus on more nutritionally rich foods, foods that are higher in density of the vitamins and minerals that your body needs. And also checking in with yourself. If you feel compelled to eat out of boredom or stress or emotionally challenging times, kind of do some self-reflection on that. Anne also goes into some of the plausible reasons why corsets act similarly to bariatric surgery, like a lap band, except obviously the corset does not carry the same risks as surgery carries. Anne is quite strict about the idea that food is for nourishment, though, and although it's fine to mindfully enjoy what you eat, she says that it's important not to overindulge or treat food as a reward or a crutch, especially in social situations. Chapter 7 is all about exercise, so Anne recommends toning your core, and there are some lifestyle waist trainers and corset wearers who enjoy wearing their corsets almost, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they feel like they don't want to build up any muscle tone that might interfere with their training. But Anne recommends maintaining your muscle tone in your back and your core, and her waist training regime doesn't require a 24/7 schedule. In fact, it's as little as 2 hours a day up to 8 hours a day, depending on your lifestyle and all of those things. Although you can wear your corset up, 12 or more hours if you desire. But she always recommends taking 1 day off per week and not wearing a corset that day, and also doing some exercise every day just to make sure that you are not growing physically dependent on the corset for back support. And this I do agree with. Obviously, we all have different starting points with our body type and our fitness, different strengths and weaknesses, different amounts of flexibility. And some of us might have old injuries that we need to be careful of. So Anne says that of the exercises that are mentioned in this book, not all exercises are suited for everyone. But she does illustrate and explain some of her favorite exercises, as well as recommendations for warm up and cool down and strengthening and improving flexibility. So now we're on to part 4, the final part of the book, and chapter 8 is about making waist training easy and comfortable. So she says that there are 3 challenges to waist training: logical, emotional, and physical. So the logical part is, just kind of how to live in your corset, especially when the modern world wants to make all your chairs like really squishy and low, and you have your bucket seats that, you can't quite sit properly in if you are wearing a corset that gives you a really straight posture. So Anne gives advice on how to sit down comfortably, advice on sleeping in your corset if you want to, how to prevent yourself from overheating, how to wear your corset stealth under your clothes, and some other things, like tips on riding in a car or a plane when corseted. The emotional challenges of wearing a corset, are you uptight or relaxed when you're wearing your corset? Anne says that the goal is to remain just a little bit detached to the whole process of waist training. She says even a little bit blasé. She also gives some tips on how to overcome, judgmental reactions from strangers or colleagues regarding your changing figure or your improved posture, and how to keep up your personal motivation during the 3-month waist training process. And in the physical challenges section, she talks about some physical effects of corseting and some of the most common concerns of people who wear corsets. She also mentioned that people who have more subcutaneous fat over their tummies are able to cinch down more and with less pressure on their waistline compared to somebody with very, very little fat and has a very strong muscle tone. And this experiment was done in 1887 and was repeated again in 1999 with similar results. She also addresses other concerns like blood pressure, what to do if you get acid reflux, what to do if you get skin problems like itching or bruising or redness, although obviously bruising is not normal in a corset. That should not be happening. So there's something wrong if you are experiencing bruising. And she also talks about, some potential bathroom concerns. And has a section on discomfort in general, how much discomfort is normal when wearing a corset or waist training, and when you should loosen your corset or when you should bear up. Anne says that training should be challenging and one should aim for a 6 or 7 on the discomfort or pain scale out of a possible 10, and just bear up with the discomfort for as long as you can, as long as you're in good health. I tend to disagree with that. I don't like wearing corsets that make me uncomfortable. I like to feel at home in my corset. To me, it should be as comfortable as wearing a pair of shoes or something. So I do not agree with that, 6 or 7 out of 10 on the pain scale sort of thing. But both Anne and I agree that since wearing a corset is your choice in the first place, and because discomfort is so subjective, it's also up to you as to how tight or loose you want to wear it and how long or short a duration you want to wear it, bearing in mind that the less you wear your corset, the less likely you are to see any sort of results when waist training. One of the last parts of the book is a chapter on maintenance corseting. So once you've reached your waist training goals, whether that be a specific natural waist measurement or a corseted waist measurement, how to keep your results while allowing yourself to wear a corset less. If you want, if you like wearing a corset every day, then, by all means, you can keep going with that if you really want to. But for maintaining your results, it often takes less effort than getting to that place in the first place. The appendices in the back of the book can be quite helpful as well, and I'm not just saying that because I'm quoted in the appendices discussing the difference between waist training and tight lacing. There's also showing the difference between a few different corset silhouettes and shapes. There's also some recipes in the back here. Most of them are low sugar, low salt, low fat. There's a typical measuring guide for a custom corset. So it's kind of like a checklist to make sure that you have all the measurements needed. And there's a chart to keep a record of your waist training progress over 3 months if you want to use that. Okay, so all in all, you are really getting a huge amount of information in this book. It is shorter than Corset Magic and it is more concise than Corset Magic, but it's still a huge amount of information. It will probably answer nearly every question you've ever had about corseting, plus some that you had never thought to ask as well. And at, $14.95, it is much easier on your wallet compared to Corset Magic, which I mentioned before is $50. It has the majority of the same information, not all of it. Corset Magic gets into more of the nitty-gritty details for the keeners, but this primer is more than sufficient for beginners and even intermediates. Anne and I are both obviously quite passionate about corsetry, and we have very strong opinions. So even when I disagree with parts of the book, take that with a grain of salt. Read it for yourself and incorporate the things that resonate with you, and leave the parts that don't. Obviously, you can do that with any book. I don't really have to tell you that. But I hope you enjoyed this review. It is very, very long, but as much as I mentioned in this video, there is just like 95% more in the book. Thank you all for watching my review. If you found it educational and you liked it, please give it a thumbs up because it really helps out my channel. If you have any comments or questions, leave it down below and I'd be happy to get back to you and answer your questions. Or if I don't know the question, then I can get Anne over here and have her answer your questions instead. Subscribe if you want to see more corset related videos because I have a lot of really exciting topics coming up this year. Thanks again, and I will see you all next week for another video. Bye.